friendless outcast and miserable all her days. Very well, you say, but the explanation is not complete yet. How did people come to drift into such a strange custom? What was the origin of the idea?
Well, nobody knows. It was probably a revelation sent down by the gods.
One more thing. Why was such a cruel death chosen? Why wouldn't a gentle one have answered?
Nobody knows. Maybe that was a revelation, too.
No, you can never understand it. It all seems impossible. You resolve to believe that a widow never burnt herself willingly, but went to her death because she was afraid to defy public opinion. But you are not able to keep that position. History drives you from it. Major Sleeman has a convincing case in one of his books. In his government on the Nerbudda he made a brave attempt on the 28th of March, 1828, to put down Suti on his own hook and without warrant from the Supreme Government of India. He could not foresee that the government would put it down itself 8 months later. The only backing he had was a bold nature and a compassionate heart. He issued his proclamation abolishing the suttee in his district. On the morning of Tuesday, note the day of the week, the 24th of the following November, Umed Singh Upadhya, head of the most respectable and most extensive Brahmin family in the district, died, and presently came a deputation of his sons and grandsons to beg that his old widow might be allowed to burn herself upon his pyre. Sleeman threatened to enforce his order, and punish severely any man who assisted, and he placed a police guard to see that no one did so. From the early morning the old widow of 65 had been sitting on the bank of the sacred river by her dead, waiting through the long hours for the permission, and at last the refusal came instead. In one little sentence Sleeman gives you a pathetic picture of this lonely old gray figure. All day and all night she remained sitting by the edge of the water without eating or drinking. The next morning the body of the husband was burned to ashes in a pit 8 feet square and 3 or 4 feet deep, in the view of several thousand spectators. Then the widow waded out to a bare rock in the river, and everybody went away but her sons and other relations. All day she sat there on her rock, in the blazing sun, without food or drink, and with no clothing but a sheet over her shoulders. The relatives remained with her, and all tried to persuade her to desist from her purpose, for they deeply loved her. She steadily refused. Then a part of the family went to Sleeman's house 10 miles away, and tried again to get him to let her burn herself. He refused, hoping to save her yet. All that day she scorched in her sheet on the rock, and all that night she kept her vigil there in the bitter cold. Thursday morning, in the sight of her relatives, she went through a ceremonial which said more to them than any words could have done. She put on the dhaja, a coarse red turban, and broke her bracelets in pieces. By these acts she became a dead person in the eye of the law, and excluded from her caste forever. By the iron rule of ancient custom, if she should now choose to live, she could never return to her family. Sleeman was in deep trouble. If she starved herself to death her family would be disgraced, and, moreover, starving would be a more lingering misery than the death by fire. He went back in the evening thoroughly worried. The old woman remained on her rock, and there, in the morning, he found her with her dhaja still on her head.
She talked very collectedly, telling me that she had determined to mix her ashes with those of her departed husband, and should patiently wait my permission to do so, assured that God would enable her to sustain life till that was given, though she dared not eat or drink. Looking at the sun, then rising before her over a long and beautiful reach of the river, she said calmly, "My soul has been for 5 days with my husband's near that sun. Nothing but my earthly frame is left, and this, I know, you will in time suffer to be mixed with his ashes in yonder pit, because it is not in your nature or usage wantonly to prolong the miseries of a poor old woman."
He assured her that it was his desire and duty to save her, and to urge her to live, and to keep her family from the disgrace of being thought her murderers. But she said she "was not afraid of their being thought so, that they had all, like good children, done everything in their power to induce her to live, and to abide with them, and if I should consent I know they would love and honor me, but my duties to them have now ended. I commit them all to your care, and I go to attend my husband, Umed Singh Upadhya, with whose ashes on the funeral pile mine have been already 3 times mixed." She believed that she and he had been upon the earth 3 several times as wife and husband, and that she had burned herself to death 3 times upon his pyre. That is why she said that strange thing. Since she had broken her bracelets and put on the red turban she regarded herself as a corpse. Otherwise she would not have allowed herself to do her husband the irreverence of pronouncing his name.
This was the first time in her long life that she had ever uttered her husband's name, for in India no woman, high or low, ever pronounces the name of her husband.
Major Sleeman still tried to shake her purpose. He promised to build her a fine house among the temples of her ancestors upon the bank of the river, and make handsome provision for her out of rent-free lands if she would consent to live; and if she wouldn't, he would allow no stone or brick to ever mark the place where she died. But she only smiled and said, "My pulse has long ceased to beat. My spirit has departed. I shall suffer nothing in the burning, and if you wish proof, order some fire, and you shall see this arm consumed without giving me any pain." Sleeman was now satisfied that he could not alter her purpose. He sent for all the chief members of the family, and said he would suffer her to burn herself, if they would enter into a written engagement to abandon the suttee in their family thenceforth. They agreed. The papers were drawn out and signed, and at noon Saturday word was sent to the poor old woman. She seemed greatly pleased. The ceremonies of bathing were gone through with, and by 3 o'clock she was ready and the fire was briskly burning in the pit. She had now gone without food or drink during more than 4 days and a half. She came ashore from her rock, first wetting her sheet in the waters of the sacred river, for without that safeguard any shadow which might fall upon her would convey impurity to her. Then she walked to the pit, leaning upon one of her sons and a nephew. The distance was 150 yards.
"I had sentries placed all around, and no other person was allowed to approach within 5 paces. She came on with a calm and cheerful countenance, stopped once, and casting her eyes upward, said,
'Why have they kept me 5 days from thee, my husband?'
On coming to the sentries, her supporters stopped and remained standing. She moved on, and walked once around the pit, paused a moment, and while muttering a prayer, threw some flowers into the fire. She then walked up deliberately and steadily to the brink, stepped into the center of the flame, sat down, and leaning back in the midst as if reposing upon a couch, was consumed without uttering a shriek or betraying one sign of agony."
It is fine and beautiful. It compels one's reverence and respect, no, has it freely and without compulsion. We see how the custom, once started, could continue, for the soul of it is that stupendous power, faith. Faith brought to the pitch of effectiveness by the cumulative force of example and long use and custom. But we cannot understand how the first widows came to take to it. That is a perplexing detail. Sleeman says that it was usual to play music at the suttee, but that the white man's notion that this was to drown the screams of the martyr is not correct, that it had a quite different purpose. It was believed that the martyr died prophesying, that the prophecies sometimes foretold disaster, and it was considered a kindness to those upon whom it was to fall to drown the voice and keep them in ignorance of the misfortune that was to come. End of Chapter 48.